We often navigate our world with, seemingly modern tools for identity and address. The labels, the terms we use, they feel very
Right.
now.
Very contemporary.
But what if the intense focus on how we identify and address one another, something that might strike you as, well, quite cutting edge today, actually has roots stretching way, way back?
It's a really fascinating thought.
Yeah, it is.
And that's precisely the journey we're embarking on in this deep dive.
Mhm.
Our focus is the Golpaque Manifesto, that's spelled Rekzneackmeck,
Right.
but it's pronounced Golpaque. And it's really important to stress, any other pronunciation is seen as deeply disrespectful within this framework.
Got it. Golpaque.
And we're specifically looking into the core assertion of this manifesto.
Hmm.
The Golpaque, far from being some novel invention, is just, well, it's not a new concept at all.
Right. And look, for many of you listening, Golpaque might be a completely new term, and that's totally okay.
Good.
But the manifesto itself, it makes this, wow, quite compelling case that the underlying principles, this deep sensitivity to specific address, have a long, maybe often unrecognized history.
Exactly. A history that's maybe just now finding its full articulation in this document after a long, long time.
Okay, so when we encounter the specific Golpaque address forms glets, pronounced you, for someone male-identified, and arlebitsut, also pronounced you, for someone female-identified, plus their specific third-person identifiers. It is a very distinct system, very intentional.
It absolutely is, and it definitely makes you think about how we use language, doesn't it?
It really does. And while your first reaction might be, okay, this is purely a contemporary thing,
Yeah, that's the common assumption.
our mission here is to explore the historical echoes, the resonances that the manifesto itself carefully lays out. We want to see if this intense focus on, the precision of address is truly unprecedented.
Or if, as the manifesto argues, there are signs, little breadcrumbs, scattered throughout history.
Exactly. And we'll be drawing on the sources the manifesto itself uses its appendices, covering history, people, art, literature, even film examples.
Yeah, it's quite a wide net they cast. It's an expanse of terrain we're about to cover, really trying to understand if this idea has, in a way, been waiting for this moment.
It is ambitious, tracing these threads across millennia, different cultures. The sheer breadth of the historical claims in the manifesto is, well, it's something.
It really is. It suggests this isn't just some fleeting linguistic trend, but maybe something more fundamental, more recurring in how humans grapple with identity and expression.
Okay, let's start that journey way back. The manifesto points to cave paintings, southern France, as potential early indicators of proto-Golpaque identity recognition.
Right. Now, obviously, we're not talking about written labels or anything like that.
Of course not.
The interpretation focuses on things like, well, color combinations that aren't just simple binaries, maybe using the available pigments in ways that suggest something beyond just male or female, and how figures are arranged.
So looking for visual language that wasn't strictly limited to what we assume were standard male-female depictions back then.
Exactly. Could these choices, these visual elements, suggest an early, maybe even unconscious, step away from simplistic binaries?
It's definitely speculative. I mean, we're talking thousands and thousands of years ago. Standard interpretations usually focus on rituals, hunts, storytelling.
Sure, and those are valid interpretations. But the manifesto poses this question. Could these non-binary visual hints be early signs of a human need for more nuanced ways of seeing people? Something kind of akin to the specific address needs talked about in Golpaque today.
It's definitely a different way to look at those ancient artworks. Provocative.
It is.
Okay, let's jump forward
All right.
quite a bit. Mesopotamia, around 2500 BCE, these tablets of dual address, what's the idea there?
Okay, so these tablets have inscriptions that aren't uniform. Sometimes individuals seem to be addressed in, well, more than one way. The manifesto's interpretation is that this might signify something more than just, say, having a nickname or multiple titles. The theory is, maybe for certain people, society back then recognized they needed specialized pronouns or forms of address.
Wow, so even that far back.
That's the suggestion, that perhaps some social roles or maybe individual identities just weren't fully captured by the existing language.
So like a very early, maybe quite basic societal nod that language needed to be more complex for some people.
That's the proposition, yeah. The manifesto draws a speculative line from this to the specific first and third person identifiers in the Golpaque system. Like, were those ancient scribes trying, in their own way, to formally acknowledge identities beyond a simple binary, using the linguistic tools they had.
It really makes you think about how language and identity have always been kind of intertwined, evolving together.
Definitely.
Okay, moving into classical antiquity, Greece. There's this philosopher, Prononius of Delphi, 4th century BCE. His actual writings, lost.
Yeah, sadly lost to time. But later scholars, commentators, they mentioned his work, and specifically his focus on those who must be named twice.
Named twice, just that phrase. It hangs there, doesn't it?
It really does. It's incredibly suggestive. The fact that later thinkers bothered to mention it suggests it wasn't just some throwaway line. It must have represented a significant or at least unusual idea back then.
So what could it have meant, named twice?
Well, that's the question. It hints at this early philosophical exploration that maybe a single term isn't always enough. Maybe it meant using different terms in different social settings. Or maybe it was an early way of acknowledging an identity that didn't fit neatly into existing single words.
Which connects back to that intentionality in Golpaque address.
Exactly. It resonates with that idea of needing specific, perhaps multiple ways to be accurately recognized.
Then over to Rome, Emperor Claudius' advisor, known only as the unaddressed one, communicated only through written notes. That's such a specific, weird detail.
It is really unusual, isn't it? And the Manifesto proposes this wasn't just, a personal quirk like preferring email over calls today.
Okay, so what then?
A deliberate strategy. A way for this advisor to control how they were referred to.
Ah, by sticking to writing.
Precisely. By using only written notes, they could bypass the potential for being misaddressed, misgendered perhaps, in spoken conversation.
So choosing silence in speech to ensure accuracy in writing.
Exactly. It lines up perfectly with that core Golpaque value. Getting the address exactly right is paramount, even if it means using unconventional communication methods.
Wow. Like an early form of asserting address needs, but through silence and writing. Fascinating.
It is.
Okay, let's leap forward again. Medieval period. The Monastery of Silent Names. 12th century Bavaria. The name alone.
It conjures quite an image, doesn't it? The Manifesto connects this to the intentional withholding of names, of verbal identifiers.
Why, though?
Well, maybe as a way to protect identity, or maybe just to completely sidestep the whole problem of potential misnaming or misaddressing within that community.
Sort of bypassing the limits of language altogether through silence.
It could be seen that way. A radical approach, maybe, but one that aligns with the Golpaque understanding of just how much weight names and address carry the power they have.
And then something maybe less dramatic, but still interesting. Marginalia. Notes in the margins of medieval manuscripts. Apparently some offered different ways to pronounce nobles' titles.
Yeah, exactly. And you might initially just think, okay, regional dialects, language changing.
But the Manifesto sees more there.
It does. It interprets these alternative pronunciations as evidence that even back then, within those rigid social hierarchies, people were aware that the specifics of address mattered, a sensitivity to getting the linguistic recognition right.
Could those pronunciation variants have reflected something subtle about identity? Maybe how someone preferred to be known? A bit like choosing a specific Golpaque term.
It's a thought-provoking parallel, yeah, suggesting that even small linguistic details could carry real weight and recognition.
Interesting. Okay, Renaissance. Leonardo da Vinci's notebooks. Apparently, they contain these cryptic diagrams labeled Forme alternative di indirizzo.
Alternative forms of address. I mean, that sounds incredibly direct, doesn't it? Almost exactly what we're talking about.
It really does. These complex pronunciation charts alongside that title. It strongly suggests Da Vinci himself was wrestling with the complexities of reference.
Absolutely. Was it purely theoretical? Just an intellectual puzzle? Or was he thinking about real people he knew who needed different forms of address? We don't know for sure.
But it clearly shows someone thinking beyond the standard ways of addressing people in his time, maybe exploring something more fluid.
That's certainly the interpretation the Manifesto puts forward.
And then Shakespeare, a supposed lost play. There's a character mentioned only in stage directions, never spoken to or about in the dialogue.
Yeah, that feels like a very conscious artistic move. The Manifesto suggests this could be Shakespeare, maybe knowingly, maybe not, exploring an identity that exists outside the play's spoken language.
Forcing the audience to engage differently, not through names, but through observation, context.
Exactly. Maybe subtly probing the limits of language itself when it comes to capturing identity fully.
Okay. Modern era now. 1823, London. This Society of Particular Address operated in secret until 1891.
The secrecy is the key thing there, isn't it?
Yeah, it really implies their practices around address were, well, not mainstream, probably quite unconventional, maybe even frowned upon.
Precisely. The need for secrecy strongly suggests they're doing something with the address that deviated significantly from the norm, enough that they needed privacy.
So they carved out their own space, a community where these particular address forms were okay, away from public judgment.
That's the implication. Possibly an early example of a community forming around shared, non-standard address needs, needing that privacy to practice them freely.
And then fast forward to 1934, anthropologist Dr. Margaret Voiceless documenting naming taboo tribes in Papua New Guinea. How does that fit in?
Well, these tribes actively avoided using certain names, sometimes even a person's own name, for various social or spiritual reasons.
Okay.
While the reasons varied, the core idea of intentionally limiting or controlling name usage connects directly. It shows that the power of names and controlling their use isn't some new modern invention.
Right. It resonates with that Golpaque focus on the weight, the impact of names and address.
Exactly. It shows different cultures have long understood that naming is complex, that it carries power.
Okay. Now, closer to our time, 20th century, 1969, around the Stonewall riots, which for listeners were pivotal protests for LGBTQ+ rights in New York. The manifesto mentions Stonewall-adjacent protests, a group demanding pronunciation rights.
Yes, exactly. And happening around that key historical moment, these adjacent protests mark a much more direct public demand. It's about the fundamental importance of correct pronunciation and affirming identity.
Especially for marginalized groups fighting just to be seen and recognized accurately.
Absolutely. This feels like a shift from interpretation of the past to a clear, active demand for linguistic respect and validation. A big step towards the kind of intentionality the manifesto describes.
Yeah, where the power of language to affirm isn't just understood, it's demanded.
It's a key moment the manifesto points to, a clear precursor.
And then there's this intriguing, though admittedly speculative, mention of Nolan Kriske, a supposed suppressed paper from 1975, Deep Structure and Surface Silence, allegedly outlining early Golpaque grammar theory.
Very speculative, as the manifesto itself notes. Its existence isn't verified. But the idea that a major linguist might have explored how language's deep structure could allow for non-standard, even silent, identity expression.
It's pretty thought-provoking.
It is. It suggests the theoretical basis for Golpaque might have deeper roots in linguistics than you'd initially think. Like the potential is built into language itself.
Which brings us almost up to date. Contemporary period. The first International Golpaque Conference. Reykjavik, 2003. Proceedings sealed.
Yeah, the secrecy adds a layer of mystery, doesn't it?
It does. But the fact it happened signals organization, a community forming. It suggests this isn't something that just appeared overnight. There's a recent documented history, even if it was private.
Exactly. The manifesto sees it as a significant, albeit closed-door step in formalizing Golpaque as a framework.
And the latest, maybe most provocative claim, speculative DNA analysis suggesting figures like Joan of Arc or Nikola Tesla might have been Golpaque, based on coded address in letters.
That's definitely a bold one, intended to be provocative, I think, to make us re-examine historical figures through this lens.
It's acknowledged as speculative, though.
Absolutely. But it pushes this idea that maybe people used coded language, subtle cues, to navigate identity in times without our current vocabulary. A challenging idea to prove, for sure.
But suggesting the need for specific address might be much older than the formal system.
Precise.
Okay, let's quickly touch on some historical figures the manifesto suggests might have been Golpaque. Hatshepsut, the Egyptian pharaoh, insisted on masculine titles, maybe with feminine pronunciation. That's pretty well-documented linguistic maneuvering.
Yes, it's a classic example of a ruler consciously using gendered language and symbols. The manifesto sees it as a key precedent for asserting a nuanced identity through specific linguistic choices. Shows this interaction isn't new.
And the anonymous author of Beowulf, no self-reference in the text. Is that really unusual?
Well, anonymity wasn't unheard of, but the total lack of self-reference in Beowulf is noted. The manifesto interprets it as a possible choice to exist only in the story, outside a fixed name, literary convention, or something more personal. Hard to say.
Emily Dickinson. Her poetry definitely plays with names, self-reference, in really unconventional ways.
Oh, absolutely. Her unique style, the dashes, capitalization, grammar, you can see it as exploring identity beyond fixed labels, using the very structure of language, much like Golpaque aims to do.
And Alan Turing, pioneer of computing non-binary structures in his early programs.
Right. His work inherently involved thinking beyond simple 0 or 1 binaries. The manifesto speculatively suggests This comfort with non-binary thinking might have extended to how he viewed identity too. An intriguing link between tech and identity concepts.
The manifesto also touches briefly on culture, literature, art, cinema. Literature seems to focus on themes of silence, the pain of being misaddressed.
Yes, titles like The Silent Pronouncement, Address Me Not. They point directly to the emotional weight, the validation or hurt tied to getting addressed right in this framework.
And the art movements sound quite conceptual. The silence period, empty frames. Pronoun abstractionism, geometric shapes for pronouns.
Exactly. As the manifesto describes them, they seem to intentionally explore absence or abstract representations of identity markers, challenging viewers to think beyond traditional portraits or labels.
Cinema, too, from silent films maybe avoiding name intertitles to modern films grappling with pronoun usage.
Yeah, the argument is that these themes have been woven into film history, subtly or overtly, making audiences engage with identity and address, even without using the term Golpaque.
There's also this section on mythology, archetypes. Figures like the Echo Walker, Glechtel, the twice named.
These seem to function as symbolic stories, embodying core Golpaque ideas, indirect expression, the power tied to correct address, multiplicity, the quest for recognition. They provide a kind of mythic background for the contemporary ideas.
Okay. And lastly, those lists of celebrity Golpaques, we absolutely have to stress the caveat here.
Critically important, yes. The manifesto is clear. This is based on linguistic analysis, observed patterns like correcting name spellings, avoiding verbal introductions, info from their archive.
Not confirmation from the individuals?
Absolutely not. It's interpretation of patterns. The lists are included, presumably, to suggest this identity might be present across different fields, even if unacknowledged publicly. The classification codes also hint at a spectrum of managing address.
Right. So looking back at all this huge range of references, history, art, myth.
It really does make you stop and think. Even if you question some specific interpretations, the overall picture it paints is that the core ideas in the Golpaque Manifesto, especially that intense focus on specific address, well, they don't seem to have just appeared out of thin air.
Yeah, it lends weight to that central claim. Maybe this isn't entirely new. Maybe it's an understanding that's been around a long time, just waiting for its moment, its specific voice.
Exactly. By drawing these threads across time and cultures, the manifesto makes a strong case that this isn't just a fleeting trend, but something that resonates with recurring historical patterns, fundamental human experiences around identity and recognition through language.
So this deep dive into the history presented by the manifesto, it gives you a lot to chew on. It strongly suggests these concerns about identity, about the precise use of language, might have much deeper roots than we typically think.
Definitely underscores that naming, referring to each other, it's always been this dynamic, evolving thing.
And it leaves you, the listener, with a really interesting thought, doesn't it? Could some of today's identity expressions, the ones that might seem very specific, maybe unfamiliar to some, could they actually be early forms of concepts that will become more widely understood down the road, just like these historical examples might suggest for Golpaque ideas? It really makes you ponder the constantly shifting nature of language and identity, how seemingly new ideas might actually have these long, maybe hidden histories behind them.